Okay, so let's see. We can go ahead and get started. Thank you all for being here. I'm really excited that Rise is hosting this workshop. For those who maybe haven't heard of Rise before, we are a nonprofit organization here in Minnesota that works to amplify the voice and power of Muslim women. And we do that through storytelling, civic engagement, and leadership development. I actually first heard of Chantal through our storytelling program because she had written an expressions blog on our website, which I'll have Camila actually put in the chat for you guys to read if you're interested. It's really good, so you should. After reading it, I knew that I wanted to collaborate with Chantal because it's so clear that she has so much knowledge to share with us that we could all benefit from. So, alhamdulillah, I am so happy that we're doing this. And as Chantal presents, please feel free to throw in as many questions as you guys have throughout the presentation in the chat. Me and my team will be collecting them, and then at the very end of the workshop, we'll go through the questions and she can answer them for us. So go ahead, Chantal.
Okay, Bismillah. Assalamu alaikum and peace, everyone. Really lovely to be with you here today. I am really excited about this topic, and I thank you for sharing where you're from. Many of you are local to Minnesota and the area, so I'm from Queens, New York, so originally from the East Coast, but I currently live in Morocco. So I will share my screen, and we can get started. So you're here for 5 keys to a peaceful period. And I just, especially for those of you who have really painful periods or have had a history of difficult periods, I just really want to let you know that I see you. It's really challenging. And I don't want to belittle what you're experiencing as well. So just know that what I'm sharing, I believe, will be a resource and support for any and all of us regardless of where we are with our periods and how we experience them. And I welcome your questions, and some of you mentioned specific conditions, and so hopefully we'll have a chance to address that in the Q&A. So thank you for being here. So even though we're not in the same physical space together, I always like to open with what I call sacred agreements. So these are some of the ways that we can be in circle with each other, even though we're not in the same physical space. So the first of the sacred agreements that I like to open with is that we show up with full presence as much as possible. So whatever you can do to be fully with us and maximize your ability to benefit, participate, and be in connection with us is appreciated, even if that looks like closing browsers, silencing your phone, tuning off any distractions, and if it's possible for you to come on camera, that even adds to your ability to be present and allows us to feel like we're together in space. The second sacred agreement is that you show up for yourself and honor yourself. So whatever you need to be comfortable here, to be at peace in this space, is for you to decide. You don't have to ask my permission to do anything. If you need a bathroom, honor yourself. If you need to get a drink of water, grab a snack to eat. Don't feel like you have to keep a fixed gaze at the screen to show how diligent you are, like we're kind of trained to do in school. If you need to look away from the screen, all of that is very welcome. Honoring your needs is very important and such a key part of honoring our menstrual cycle as well. And the last will be to honor each other. So whatever is shared here remains here, and to honor people's questions, their curiosities, not to belittle each other in the comments, and to whatever is shared here that you don't feel the need to divulge it or share elsewhere, so that we can have some degree of confidentiality. So if that's agreeable to you, if those 3 agreements work for you, showing up with full presence, honoring yourself and honoring each other, can you just give me a reaction, a thumbs up, some kind of acknowledgement? Thank you that you are. Thank you that the sacred agreements are agreeable to you. Thank you. Those of you that are with us, thank you so much. Okay. All right. So I'll begin by introducing myself. So if we haven't already met, I'm the founder of Honored Womb, which is a holistic menstrual health education platform. I'm also the author of Peaceful Periods, Holistic Womb Care for Teens, but it's actually for anyone and anyone who menstruates or is going to menstruate, but it's readable for preteens. I'm also a womb wellness coach, so I help women privately and through courses and coaching to overcome and break cycles of painful periods, hormonal chaos, and fertility challenges. I'm also a wife of almost 20 years next month. I'm a mother of three children, ages 4 to 14, and I'm a Quran student. None of this is in order of priority. I just want to give you a sense of what my life looks like and how I spend my time and my days. And so just to outline what we'll cover today, we're going to talk about what is the fifth vital sign. We're going to talk about first periods as the foundation, challenges to peaceful periods, and 5 keys to a peaceful period. And then we'll share some resources for support, and then we'll have our Q&A session. And so I know even the idea of a period being peaceful sounds very radical, maybe sounds impossible, but hopefully you can stay with me as we move through this conversation, and we can see the possibility of a peaceful period for all of us. And just as a disclaimer, nothing that I'm sharing is a substitute for medical advice. This is for your personal benefit, for educational purposes only. So we will begin. So what is the fifth vital sign? So in 2015, the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology produced a committee opinion stating that menstruation in girls and adolescents using the menstrual cycle as a vital sign. And this was a huge affirmation for the community of women that I work with, right? As practitioners who look at a more holistic model of understanding the menstrual cycle, we know that periods are important. But unfortunately, we don't always get treated as if our periods are important, right? Sometimes women will tell me, I go to the doctor and I tell them about my pain, and it's like, well, some women are just like that. Or my heavy bleeding, well, some women are just like that. But this statement is so big and is so significant because a vital sign tells you it's an indicator of your wellness in your body. When you go to a doctor and they check your vital signs, it's your temperature, your blood pressure, your pulse, and your respiratory rate. And these key indicators give you a baseline for where you are and how well you are in that moment in time, right? We know what an optimal range of your blood pressure is, your temperature, your respiratory rate, or pulse. And so to acknowledge that in the female body, the period or the menstrual cycle can offer just as critical information about your overall health was a huge acknowledgement. And it's something that has been known in holistic so-called Eastern medicine systems for a very long time, right? It's very common in holistic medicine. If you look at Ayurveda, traditional Chinese medicine, Unani Tib, naturopathy as a whole, it's very well understood that the menstrual cycle can be used as a diagnostic tool, right? How you bleed, when you bleed, how often, the symptoms you experience can give you vital information about your health and what's happening in your body. So knowing that it can be a tool that helps to understand what's happening in your overall hormonal system and endocrine system and circulatory system is really important. In traditional Chinese medicine, the menstrual cycle or menstruation itself is considered a golden opportunity. And a golden opportunity are one of the times in our lives, it's a time where we have this opportunity to pour into our health and rejuvenate and revitalize ourselves. Or if neglected, it's a time that could be depleting for our health. So the period and menstruation as a whole was always regarded as something that needed to be cared for, that had special care and special ways of pouring into a woman as she's menstruating. Because if she's not poured into, if she's not cared for, then it was acknowledged that it could be depleting for her overall health. So our menstrual cycle is also reflecting our state of health to us. Some call our period a monthly report card. It can tell us how well we are eating, sleeping, caring for ourselves, managing stress, moving our bodies. All of these things can be communicated through the period. And for some, even the idea that the menstrual cycle is almost like a compass. If we know what these different features and symptoms are, it can help us understand what we need more of in our life. So I'll give you an example. Looking at the color of menstrual blood is a key indicator on the quality of blood in your body, right? And the hormonal levels that you have. So for example, if you tend to have very pink blood, right? If you bleed very pale, pink menstrual blood, or you tend to have very light, short periods, meaning that you don't bleed for many days, like 3 days or less, that tends to tell us that the quality of blood in the body is not optimal. And if blood quality is not optimal, then the uterine lining is not optimal, and we don't get this healthy red flow of blood. So we can actually see traits of what's considered blood deficiency or anemia in the period, even without a blood test. On the other end, if a person is bleeding brown or black blood, these are signs of really significant stagnation, that blood is not moving well enough, right? That it's slow, it's sluggish, and we're not seeing this healthy, fresh red color. So this is just one example. There are other features of the menstrual cycle that can tell us about if there's excess heat in the body, if there's dampness, dryness in the body, and it's really a beautiful language once you learn it. So the period is not just something that we experience and endure, it's actually a reflection of our health, a reflection of how we're caring for our hormones and how our endocrine system is functioning, which is really valuable and important. And our first periods themselves are really the foundation for our relationship with our periods. So this is a picture of my daughter and I, and the way that we are prepared for our first period already starts to set in motion our expectations, our beliefs, our attitudes about the fact that we have a period, right? So what were some of the stories that you even heard about periods before you had your first period? And you can share them in the chat. You know, what story did you receive? Did someone tell you they're horrible, they're painful, they're the worst part of being a woman? Did someone tell you that they're amazing, they're powerful, they connect you to all of the women who came before you? So just take a moment and reflect on that. What was your first story when menstruation or periods came into your consciousness? Do you remember the story that it was wrapped in? And you can continue to share that. My mother never even mentioned periods, okay? So then that's always a challenge when it's like no acknowledgement of this very evident reality. Any others you can share? I feel like my early story, most of it came from probably peers telling me about what I couldn't do if I had my period, couldn't swim and couldn't do this, and so that was a part of, so already that's a story of what you can't do, right? This loss, this opportunity that is no longer available to you, and as others come up you can share them. So the story that we have about menstruation and about periods, it starts to already set in motion. Do I expect them to be painful? Do I expect them to be peaceful? Is it something that I can openly talk about and ask questions, or do I have to conceal it? And I've heard so many varied experiences, especially in the Muslim community, which I primarily serve. I've heard women who told me that their mothers were pediatricians and never said anything about their periods. They had their first period and they thought that their urethra was bleeding. And the same woman said to me, can you imagine, I knew what a urethra was, but I didn't know what a period was. And obviously as a pediatrician, her mother has to have these conversations in her office and in her practice, but could not even consider preparing her daughter and having open conversation about this natural biological function. I know some women have told me that their first period was a time of sadness and grief. Their mothers were disappointed, they cried, or they said, no one can know about this. Your father, your brothers, your male family members, no one must see this or know about it. You must always put away your pads. No one can get any trace of it. And then I also have heard stories on the other spectrum. I have a friend of mine who's Indian, and she shared with me that in her culture, she was celebrated. She had a huge party with gifts, photo shoot, uncles and aunts. And even to this day, she can remember that first period. In her culture, they put together a floral bath for her. They scrubbed her with turmeric and sandalwood. So she has this conscious memory of women coming together, pampering her, honoring her, and everyone in her community, even her male relatives, giving her gifts and showering her with this adoration. And if you look throughout different cultures, you'll also find that there are different ways that first periods are recognized in the stories that we have. Another challenge is that culturally, we might have had rites of passage like this account I shared from my friend from India. Maybe in our culture at some point, we had rites of passage. We had special celebrations, special meals, special gifts, special ceremonies to mark the milestone of coming into this life as a young woman. But because our heritages have largely been disrupted by colonization, by migration, by conflict, war, genocide, there are many reasons why we may not still have a connection to what our ancestors or how our ancestors practiced or honored this moment in time. And so even if we can't pull on our cultural heritage for some affirmation or some reminder of how important periods are, we also have our Islamic tradition. We have traditions in Islamic history of a girl being given a necklace by the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ when she had her first period, and being shown and instructed in how to clean herself because she had soiled herself and his luggage. She was on his riding beast. So we have stories like the story of Umayyah bint Qais, where she was given a gift after her first period from the Prophet himself. We have examples of the Prophet ﷺ comforting Lady Aisha radiallahu anha. So when she was on her period, there were different endearing ways that he would show tenderness and kindness to her. And then we also have other examples. The women of Medina used to have first period parties. They used to celebrate periods. And so even if we don't find it in our cultural heritage, even our spiritual and religious heritage gives us an anchor in celebrating rites of passage as well. And then confidence after puberty is really huge. So there's a researcher named Katja Risling-Baldi. She's an Indigenous American researcher, and she cites research that stated that comparing confidence between boys and girls before puberty and after puberty. So in the research she cites, boys and girls kind of approach puberty with comparable levels of confidence. So I want you to answer in the chat. What do you think happens after puberty? So going into puberty, boys and girls have comparable levels of confidence. What do you think shifts after puberty? Does that remain the same? Does whose confidence increases, decreases, stays the same? What are your thoughts? No wrong answers. Just let me know what you're thinking. So I see girls goes down. Girls have less confidence. I'm sure men get more confidence. Boys go up. Okay, so you all are on brand. So for boys, their confidence goes up slightly, and for girls it plummets. Right? Confidence after puberty plummets. And so the research that was cited, they didn't have an explanation. They said, we're not sure why this happens, but this is what we observed in American youth, right? The data set that they were looking at. And this researcher, Katja Risling-Baldi, she was like, it's evident to me what's happening, right? When girls now have to manage their period in spaces and cultures and in societies where menstruating is seen as taboo, shameful, hidden, and it's not celebrated, then clearly that contributes to that loss of confidence, having to manage this changing body, these changing functions in spaces that are not supportive. And so she tested her theory within her indigenous community, the Caddo people in Northern California, and they started to bring back their flower dance. Actually, I might be confusing two different stories, but in her particular, I'm not sure what tribe that she belonged to, but in her particular tribe, they started to revive their rites of passage ceremonies that were lost. So gathering women, celebrating. For some, this looks like a flower dance that they perform or certain rituals that are shared in community. And what they noticed is that the girls were not losing their confidence anymore. And so she concluded that as long as girls are hearing positive stories of menstruation, they don't have this loss of confidence. And then added to that, when you're able to have open dialogue and celebrate as a cohort, this impacts girls and they don't experience the same loss of confidence. And she feels so strongly that this can set in motion a whole trajectory that's totally different for girls in the treatment that they expect and that the treatment that they demand when they're moving through life in young womanhood in that confidence. And then we also have our cultures, right? Our cultures may affirm or contradict certain beliefs. I've talked with some women who said, I thought having a period was a great thing. And when I told people about it, they were like, what's wrong with you? So our culture has a message as well that shapes how we think about menstruating and our periods as well. So those are a couple of things that really start the foundation. If you assume that something shouldn't be talked about, it's harder to access help and resources. If you can't openly discuss something, then how do you advocate for yourself to get the kind of help that you need? And if you're told that it's horrible and painful, then you just accept and normalize pain. And even as it worsens and worsens, you just accept that, well, they said it's painful, so I guess I just have to endure, instead of having a baseline that it doesn't have to be this way and that there are ways to support yourself. So some of the challenges to peaceful periods are definitely just the times and circumstances we're living in, right? There are a couple of cultural myths that we deal with. So some people may have, like I said, been told that periods are just horrible for everyone. They're painful for everyone. Suck it up. PMS is normal. And so we just kind of live in this story that it's horrible for everyone and it's going to be horrible for us. But this is not true. It's not every woman's reality, and it can be impacted. You can make choices that change your experience of your period. Also, our modern diet, we don't eat the same way that, we don't eat in the most supportive ways anymore. We have an abundance of processed foods. We have an abundance of fast foods. There's less nourishing foods that really support our overall hormonal health and well-being, and that's a factor. A lot of eating on the go, grabbing things and not having proper meals that are filled with nutrition and vitamins and minerals and macronutrients that we need to make healthy hormones, have healthy ovulation, and have healthy menstrual cycles. Many of us deal with a barrage of toxicity in our environments. So whether it's our food quality, right, foods being sprayed with pesticides and herbicides, there is an abundance of endocrine disrupting chemicals in our waterways as well. All of the pharmaceuticals that are ingested get passed through our urine and enter our waterways, and there isn't a clear system of how to remove that from our water municipality. So, unfortunately, we have this impact of kind of pharmaceuticals in our waterways if we're drinking or having contact with kind of conventional tap water. We also are in contact with plastic to a much higher degree than ever before, right? We're drinking water out of plastic, we're eating food out of plastic, we're in contact with receipts that are coated in plastic, airline tickets that are coated, like there are plastic traces on so many points of contact that we have throughout our lives. And then just also normalize stress, right? It's normal now to be stressed out, to be hustling, to have very little sleep, to rely on caffeine and sugar to get through the day. That's just considered normal, right? The normal life of a student, the normal life of an employee. And once you have this idea that everyone's stressed out and everyone is relying on caffeine and sugar to get through the day, we don't realize how this is contributing to the health of our menstrual cycle and challenging the health of our hormones. And then there's also, I have to just name it, that there's medical misinformation. Some of us have been told very misleading things about from our medical practitioners. I was told when I was younger, when I had irregular periods, that as long as you have 4 periods a year, you're perfectly fine. But we now know that that's not ideal. You're not perfectly fine if you're not having a monthly bleed, right? So that's a bit of misinformation. We're also told that birth control can solve any period problem you have. You got hormonal acne, you got period pain, you got heavy bleeding, just take hormonal birth control and it will be perfectly safe. And what we now know is that long-term birth control use, it disrupts your gut microbiome. It makes you predisposed to mood changes. It shrinks some of your vaginal tissue and your clitoris. It also contributes to risk for other challenges later in life. It can compromise your fertility after long-term use. So, we've been told that birth control is safe. Just, pop some pills, take some pain medication too, and just take a higher dose if you have more pain. And these are not solutions. These are not accurate sources of information. To tell a woman that birth control will regulate her period is misinformation, right? Because it doesn't regulate her period. If it's suppressing her ovulation, she's not having a menstrual cycle anymore. She's just having what's considered breakthrough bleeding when she takes placebo, birth control pills. So again, there's a certain level of misinformation that makes it challenging for us to have healthy periods because of the information we're getting. So these are a couple of challenges. So don't feel like you are alone, or don't feel like it's just me, or what am I doing so wrong? We have to look at the context that we're in. And now that we're aware, then we have this opportunity to make a shift. So Malika shares, I've never had a painful period, but 2 of my sisters and now my daughter have incredibly painful periods. And some of this has to do with our habits. Sometimes we have different eating habits, different movement habits, and sometimes it also has to do with how we manage our emotions and how we manage stress. So our emotional health can also impact our menstrual health. The quality of our eating, our sleeping, like I talked about, can also be a factor as well. And especially within families, people assume, oh, we all have painful periods, or our mother had difficult periods, or my mom had fibroids, or my mom had heavy bleeding, so I have it too. I was recently with an Egyptian sister, and she said, my mom always tell me, we Arab women, we bleed a lot. And this was just how it was normalized, her heavy bleeding. And then she started to travel, she studied abroad, and she carried her pain medicines from her home country, right? So I was in Bosnia, so she grew up in Bosnia, and she's of mixed Egyptian and Bosnian heritage. So she travels from Bosnia with her pain medication for her period. And she's in a dorm. I think she was studying in Turkey with students from all over the world, right? Djibouti and Malaysia, and studying with all of these students, and they carried their herbs. So she was like, what a contrast that I'm traveling with my drugs, like these pills that I was taught to take every month to manage my period. And all of my roommates carried the herbs from their country that they knew would support them in managing their period pain. And so the more she started to meet other people and she started to talk, and she would ask other Arab women, do you have heavy bleeding too? Is it really true that we Arabs, we just bleed a lot? So again, having conversations and realizing that sometimes we're in these spaces where myths are perpetuated. And as for your question, I don't see a causation between diabetes and pain, period pain, but it's something we can talk more about. So we are going to talk about what are some of what I identify as the 5 keys to peaceful periods, because in my work, I help women no longer have painful periods. And so you can't really convince me that periods have to be painful, because I myself went from having painful periods as a teen, curled up in bed, heavy bleeding, clotting, and then that hasn't been my reality since I was probably around 18, right? There were some critical changes that I made in how I eat and how I cared for myself, and I've never had, alhamdulillah, I've never had a painful period again. So you can't really tell me that it has to be that way. And this is the work that I help women do all the time, is make the changes so that they don't have these painful periods anymore. So this is what I believe are the 5 keys to peaceful periods. Thank you, Sarah. I noticed that my menstrual pain sometimes varies month to month. Could you share what might be the potential cause of increased or decreased period pain month to month? Yeah, we can talk about that too. So I think firstly, to even approach the idea of peaceful periods, we actually have to be willing to make peace with our periods. Some of us have already decided we're in a battle with our periods, we have code names, we have derogatory things that we think about our periods, that we say about our periods. I can't wait. I wish I didn't have this. I can't wait for menopause. Really start by checking your language and how you respond to your period and some of your inner dialogue, right? If you're already fighting, it's hard to make peace. So what would it look like to think of your period as an ally instead of an enemy? What would it look like and feel like to know that my period is actually communicating something to me? It's not out to get me. It's not hurting me. It's not trying to keep me from living my best life. It's actually just reflecting the input that it's receiving. And that might be conscious input that I know about or unconscious input, but it's reflecting. So I often say, think about your period. Imagine you're in a tennis match. Your period can only serve what you're serving, right? The quality of hormones you can make, it's only what you're putting in, right? It doesn't come from the sky. The quality of care that you put in, you're going to get that served back to you. So really start to imagine that your period is trying to talk to you and communicate like, hey, I need some more support. I need you to slow down here. I need you to feed me better, right? Imagine that you're in a dialogue. So in my book, I tried to use this analogy. Imagine a friend comes to your house, and when you see your friend, you shut the door, you say, go away, right? That's a very different relationship than from opening that door and saying, welcome. You know, I've been expecting you. I've been waiting for you. I'm here to be at your service. How can I support you? What do you need, right? So just starting to shift how we interact with our period needs to really be an important first step. And some of that preparing for your friend, preparing for this time to come, will also require you to track what's going on, right? To not always be so clueless about when my period is coming. And if you generally have irregular cycles, I know that that can be challenging, but just having a consciousness and starting to be aware that, okay, around this time, my period should be due. So what can I do to make space for myself, to show myself more care and tenderness at this time? And make that conscious preparation where you're thinking about what actually helps me, right? What makes me feel better when I am on my period, right? Does it help when I nap? Does it help when I'm having using a hot water bottle? Does it help when I massage my womb? I have one friend, and she always tells me, she says, I need to dance before my period comes. She says, if I don't dance before my period comes, I have cramping. So literally she has a commitment to twerking and dancing before the period comes, because it just gets blood moving in her pelvis so well, and she notices it on a monthly basis. So I'm not saying that that's the only answer, but I'm just saying start to take your symptoms, start to notice what changes and what improves for you. So I would say, I think it's amazing if you're noticing that month to month it's different. Now it's an opportunity to start tracking what helped and what didn't, right? How was I moving, sleeping, eating? What was happening for me? What was really stressful, challenging? What was really joyful and relaxing? So trying to cultivate more awareness first and foremost. The second key, I would say, is to definitely prioritize period care. Like, treat your period like it matters, right? We talked about it as a fifth vital sign, as a golden opportunity. Let's shift the idea that it's just a nuisance or something you have to deal with versus something that is healthy for you and that is communicating to you. And so how can we prioritize how we care for ourselves? First thing we can do is check our period products. Not all period products are created equal. A lot of the conventional period products have bleached cotton and chemicals, artificial fragrances that don't positively contribute to our experience. So we want to be a little bit bougie, as I say, about our period care, right? Like, don't just think of, the best things to be wearing on the outside, but these are very intimate parts of your body. Your vaginal tissues are very porous, very absorbent. So pay attention to the quality of period products that you're using and that you have access to. Of course, unbleached cotton and organic would be ideal. But if that is a financial challenge, because it tends to cost more than your typical kind of always Kotex run-of-the-mill off-the-shelf products, you can also consider investing in reusable period products like cloth pads, or period panties, or for some people, menstrual cups. Tampons in general tend to have a stagnating effect on menstrual flow. So something to experiment with yourself. If you do use tampons, do you find that you have more cramping with the use of tampons or without? Because sometimes the body does have a contracting effect when it's trying to push something out. So if you've ever noticed you have menstrual clots and you feel cramping kind of building, and then there's a release when a clot is passed, sometimes tampons stimulate a similar contracting action. So try that. Some people, menstrual cups have a similar kind of stagnating effect for them. So some people notice that their cramps increase with menstrual cups, as well as tampons. So that's something you can notice for yourself. but really investing in quality period care products as best as you can, making space for rest and slowing down, like you are actually bleeding. And no, this is not the bleeding from like injury or harm. It's a different kind of blood. Our menstrual blood is actually a very healing blood, right? It's filled with stem cells. It's antibacterial and antifungal and antiviral. It actually has a very cleansing effect on the body, and it also helps to detox the uterus of different toxins that we are in contact, right? We're now noticing that even phthalates and like different chemicals that we're in contact with, they're noticing it in menstrual blood as well. So it's a channel and a way for the body to be flushed of these toxins. And then we also want to prefer warmth over cold. So try to keep that as a principle in mind when you're on your period. How can you incline towards warmth? Because warmth improves circulation. And if circulation is improved, then there's less effort that the uterus has to do. There's less clotting generally, and there's less older, darker blood as opposed to fresh red blood. Anything that is cold while we're bleeding is going to it's going to slow down, right? Cold has the effect of constricting blood flow, whereas warmth is dilating, right, and opening blood flow. And this doesn't mean that you're going to be more prone to flooding or over bleeding, but it can mean that you could be more prone to cramping and clotting if you're eating cold foods, drinking cold, as opposed to choosing what is warming, like tea, soups and stews. Even herbs and spices that have a warming effect can also improve the health of the period. There was research done about ginger tea, and how ginger tea with some women has as strong as an effect as your typical pain reliever medication, like your Midol and what have you, or ibuprofen. So, consider inclining towards warmth, making that warm tea for yourself, making that warm soup or having it made for you. It can be really supportive when you're on your period to relieve period pain as well. Another tea that's really helpful throughout the entire month, including during your period, but particularly if you have heavy bleeding, red raspberry leaf tea is also really helpful for reducing heavy bleeding and supporting healthy periods overall. So red raspberry leaf tea is a great resource. The third key to peaceful periods is really making nourishment a priority. So we have to understand that even if we're not thinking about babies, the menstrual cycle is really built on reproduction, trying to reproduce, and if it's not successful, trying again and again. And to ovulate or to release an egg, it's a process that requires resources, and we actually have to put resources in our body. And the quality of our ovulation impacts the quality of our hormones, impacts the quality of our bleed, right, or our menstruation. So we have to make nourishing the female body a priority. The female body requires nourishment and safety to ovulate and have healthy, regular cycles. And so if we're not putting in the input, we're not going to get the output. Studies have been shown that when women tend to skip breakfast, they tend to be more prone to PMS and period pain. So really paying attention to how are you feeding yourself? How are you nourishing yourself? Especially if you're in your peak childbearing years. So if you're in your 20s and 30s, this is not an optimal time to practice like intermittent fasting, for example. There are studies that show that maybe perimenopausal and menopausal women respond better to intermittent fasting. But on a daily basis, just making it a habit to skip breakfast and just figuring out food later in the day can predispose you to different hormonal and reproductive issues later on. So making breakfast a priority, and with every meal prioritizing protein. A lot of clients that I serve that are in the UK, I'll ask them, okay, well, what do you eat for breakfast? And they'll tell me tea and toast. I was like, okay, tea and toast isn't really, doesn't really have a couple of key macronutrients, namely protein, for example. So carbs and sweetened tea is not really giving your body the fuel that it needs to make quality hormones. And so prioritizing protein is really important in your meals. So making sure there's always a clear source of protein, that it's not just eating pasta and cheese. Like, okay, well, what's your source of protein? how are you acquiring at least 25 to 30 grams of protein in each meal? And that can be a benchmark. So if you like oatmeal, what are you going to add to that oatmeal? Are you going to add some nut butter or some seeds? Are you going to, how many eggs are you eating in a day, right? If you eat eggs, one egg has about 6 grams of protein. So one egg is not enough protein for for a meal, right, to be considered a full protein serving. So being comfortable with eating more protein and planning for that and paying attention to that. Eating healthy fats is also really important for peaceful periods because all of our hormones are built from fat, and our body uses that fat to make the precursors to all of the hormones we make. And so we actually need, in particular, when I say healthy fats, another key when it comes to period pain is that it's the type of fats that we could be eating, because some fats turn on inflammation in the body. So some fats like vegetable oil, seed oil, sunflower oil, corn oil, they turn on inflammatory markers in the body. Whereas fats that are anti-inflammatory are going to turn off those inflammatory markers. And so especially in the case of endometriosis or period pain in general, you want to be conscious that you're inclining towards foods that are not inflammatory, right? So some of the fats that are anti-inflammatory are going to be your fats that are like, for example, like a really good quality ghee or butter. If you're making salad dressing, or if you're not cooking with it, olive oil is ideal, not for cooking. Avocado oil, tallow if you have access, but some of these kind of traditional fats actually have an anti-inflammatory effect on the body, especially if they are free range. So if you have access to free range dairy and free range eggs, this is going to have a more calming effect. And these fats will influence if the uterus makes more contracting prostaglandins, which are a type of chemical, or more relaxing prostaglandins. So that's something to pay attention to. We also want to make sure we have magnesium-rich foods, especially when we are in the week leading up to our period and during our period. Magnesium is a mineral that we use so much of. And so when we are able to, sometimes when our magnesium is low, it can make us more prone to feeling cramping. You might even feel leg cramps, right? Or headaches, or, menstrual cramping. And so magnesium has a relaxing effect. It also helps with constipation. So another big key with peaceful periods is if you struggle with constipation, if you don't have daily bowel movements, then there's really no way to get balanced hormones if you're not eliminating on a daily basis. And so some of the women that I work with that have the worst periods have the worst constipation. They don't go to the toilet every day. They struggle to go once or twice a week. And so this is another big part of what you would want to use nutrition to help you achieve. And so fiber is really great for eliminating every day, being hydrated for sure, and then healthy fats also help with motility and having daily bowel movements. And sometimes it's circumstances. Sometimes we have a natural impulse to use the toilet, but it's like, oh, I have to go to work or I have to go to school. And we just get used to just holding and holding and holding. And again, this pattern of holding the urge to go or holding instead of relieving ourselves does impact our uterine health as well. So just know that elimination is really important. Examples of magnesium-rich foods could be foods like almonds and avocados, dark chocolate, spinach. So it doesn't necessarily have to be from a special supplement, though you can use a supplement, especially if you struggle with challenging constipation. And another way to get magnesium is Epsom salt baths, foot soaks. That's another way you can get magnesium into your body. And there are also magnesium sprays for topical magnesium as well. And for your daily elimination, you want to pay attention to your fruits and veggies. Also having whole, complete grains, right? So whole grains in your diet that have the fiber intact. So that would be like whole wheat versus white wheat when making choices about your consumption. And fermented foods are also really great if you struggle with constipation. So anything fermented, whether that's sauerkraut or kimchi or achar, Fermented breads like injera, sourdough are also really helpful as well. And then the fourth key I would say is protecting your rest. It has such a huge impact on our hormonal health. So that looks like a consistent bedtime as much as you're able to. Really limiting your screen use, particularly in the evening, because the light that we get from screens mimics sunlight and it can disrupt our circadian rhythm, which is our wakefulness and sleep cycle, our daily kind of rhythm. Sleeping in a dark room is really helpful for quality sleep, and avoiding eating very late because that can be a deterrent to getting into bed at a decent time, and it can just be really disruptive as well. The liver is quite active when we sleep, particularly after like 10 or 11 p.m. The liver has the job of cleansing the blood in our bodies, and so eating very late kind of can make the liver a bit sluggish in doing its job at night, so trying not to eat too late. And thinking of rest as sleep is a part of rest, but what is restful for you? Like taking intentional time for the things that feel restful, whether that's reading, journaling, writing, non-screen activities that help you to feel rested and unwind. And the last I will say is really orienting to safety, joy, and pleasure. So our nervous systems also impact our experience of our period. And so if we're constantly in a state of high alert, constantly in spaces that feel stressful to us, so in the female body, we register our sense of safety in our pelvis. And so if you imagine that you are moving through life in a highly stressful state most days, most of the times, over time, it creates this constant tension and tightening in the pelvic floor. And when things start to get very tight and tense in the pelvis, it increases our period pain, right? So this congestion impacts the blood circulation getting to our uterus. It impacts the actual physical space that our womb is able to take up in the pelvis as well. And so being conscious of how we seek and how we recognize safety and joy and pleasure, all of the things that our nervous system recognizes as supportive of bringing forth life, as supportive of ovulation, right? Because remember, we need to ovulate to have our periods. So that can look like seeking spaces where you feel belonging and acceptance, where you don't have to tense and, kind of camouflage who you are, where you can be as you are, say your name as it's to be said, speak your mother tongue as it's supposed to be said. Maybe these spaces can be places where we feel a sense of belonging and acceptance, where we feel like we don't have to camouflage or change who we are to be welcomed or included. Curating healthy relationships, because again, that's another source of this constant tension and tucking that you might physically notice in your body, but definitely gets registered in our pelvis, right? Are you in relationships that make you feel safe? Are you in spaces? Do you live in presence with people who you feel safe around? Making time for presence in your daily actions and self-awareness. And so even when we have a lot to do, making it a practice to orient to, like, what can I do to bring more presence and more pleasure to the moment that I'm in right now? So even if I were to ask myself that, I might shift in my seat a little bit, or I might say, I could take a glass of water right now. Sometimes we get into these patterns of just neglecting ourselves, and they just become really wired into our bodies in a really unhealthy way. And just valuing what brings you joy, because, safety brings forth all of the good things, right? So when we feel safe in our bodies, that turns on healing in our body, that turns on longevity in our body. And the contrast is when we don't feel safe, when we don't feel belonging, it turns on disease, it turns on aging. And so don't think that, if you've ever heard the phrase, you can't heal a body that you don't love, similarly, right? We need to be able to cultivate enough safety for healing to happen and for wellness to thrive. And so to share a couple of resources, so this is Menstrual Health Awareness Month, which I call Menstrual May. And so I have a couple of offers that could be resources for support. So if you're interested in getting a copy of Peaceful Periods, there's a coupon code to buy 2 books this month. That's incorrect. Actually, it's all month. The 2 books for $30 US. So that's until May 31st. So I'll correct that. And then I have a master class that I teach called Peaceful Periods and Happy Hormones, which is basically a much deeper dive into the tools, the resources, and how to really support healthy menstrual cycles and healthy hormones. And I created a coupon code for you, so you get $100 off of lifetime access, and that one is correct. It is until May 19th. And there's also a free checklist, and so I can put all of these in the chat, 7 signs of a healthy and fertile womb. So if you've ever been really curious about like what is my period saying and what do I need to give attention to or what I can work on, then this is a good starting point. It's a free checklist, and it just goes through the 7 key features of the menstrual cycle to help you gauge where are you in assessing that vital sign. And if you want to stay in touch, then you have my website, my email, and my social media accounts. And I will also put the links that I mentioned in the chat as well. And now we can open for Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chantal. I know that you touched a little bit on the 2 questions that were already put into the chat. Do you want to dive deeper into them, or should we open up some more questions?
So I know the one about about diabetes. Yeah, so that's something that I've never really. I will say this: there is blood sugar regulation. So now that I think about it more, blood sugar regulation is a really big part of hormonal balance. And so all of our hormones, how they are directed really comes to 2 fundamentals, our cortisol and our insulin. So insulin has to do with our blood sugar balance, and cortisol has to do with our stress and our rest. And so now that I think about it, yeah, if you're having difficulties with blood sugar regulation, that can impact the quality of hormones, but I can't see it as causing pain. I can see it causing irregular menstrual cycles because stable blood sugar is how our body perceives that we're safe. So that's standing out to me now. So it'll be really important to really manage blood sugar so that hormones are stable, that you get regular monthly ovulation, and that she doesn't get predisposed to like PCOS or other conditions connected to insulin resistance. And as far as period pain varying, so it could be changes in how we eat, it could be stress levels, all of that contributes. Some people can track how how different events in 1 month contributed to their period pain versus another. So yeah, it's something to definitely pay attention to, but as you're going through the month, like trying, maybe even keeping a journal could be really helpful. And another thing I was thinking, I have a friend, and she told me she was having a difficult conversation with her sister. And every time they talked about this difficult topic, her sister, who was on her period, she would like double over in pain. Like the pain was in real time increasing as she was talking about this difficult topic. And then when they stopped talking about it, she got some relief. So don't neglect the connection between your emotions and your stress and your menstrual cycle, because they're very, very connected. So Malika shares, yes, her period is all over the place, and endocrinologist said that comes with being a type 1 diabetic. Tracking this first year of periods has been impossible. We'll make it easy for her. Yeah, definitely getting the blood sugar managed and her eating habits managed are going to be really super important. And then having practices that orient her body to rhythm is also really helpful. So that can be looking like a very consistent bedtime, right? Really having to protect her sleep, especially, I don't know if she's a teenager. I know with mine, I have to pay attention to like screen access and what have you, so that she has enough time to really wind down and sleep well. So I would say anything that orients her to rhythm, trying to eat as routinely as possible, particularly breakfast, is going to be really important, heavy on the protein side for stable blood sugar, and then also sleeping as consistently as possible. And then for some women, there are particular practices that help to keep the regularity of their period. So they may have a practice that they do every new moon or every full moon, and it does help to keep the rhythm of the cycle. So that could look like a womb steaming practice, it could look like a womb massage practice, it can look like acupuncture. So those are some other things that if scheduled in a rhythmic way, can kind of cue her body to stay in rhythm. I'm really interested in PCOS versus endometriosis. It feels like every single woman I know has ovarian cysts. Yeah. And so, so PCOS is really interesting because it's really a metabolic disorder. It's not really, the cysts can or cannot show up, right? Cysts are like an optional part of PCOS because you can have other symptoms of PCOS without ovarian cysts. Any part of the body, any gland has the potential to become a cyst, any gland that produces fluid. And so sometimes, the ovaries, sometimes cysts can kind of come and go over time. But PCOS is a particular presentation because the metabolism in the body is off and there's a lot of insulin resistance where the body doesn't really take like blood sugar, glucose getting into the cells can be a challenge. So blood sugar tends to be all over the place, and that makes androgens all over the place, and that makes ovulation all over the place. And so sometimes PCOS is brought on by different habits around eating that can be really difficult. So not eating consistently, eating very late, not eating in like a predictable way. So the body is not really sure, when am I getting food and when is it going to come? So I have well, these were women over 40. I do know some women with PCOS that found that intermittent fasting did help with some of their PCOS symptoms. So it depends on how it's showing up in the individual's body. If it's showing up as irregular periods, and that same advice of like building rhythm into your eating and sleeping and in your care. Like sometimes you actually need to, like your womb is really just here in your pelvis. We think like, I don't know what's going to happen, periods coming or not, but you could really like just put your hands on your womb. Like you could actually just massage your womb and try to, regularly have practices that bring blood flow and attention and circulation to your ovaries and to your womb. Like you can literally massage your ovaries. It's something that we can do. We just, we're not really taught how to do that. And as for endometriosis is interesting because, you have lining that's growing irregularly and in irregular places. And so even though in the Western medical world, they don't have an understanding of why it's caused or what causes it, in Eastern medicine, it's understood as a symptom of stagnation, right? There's a lot of stagnation happening in the pelvis. There's also a strong correlation with endometriosis and some kind of boundary violation. It's not always a correlation, but for some women, there are patterns of feeling unsafe. And it kind of gets, it's called armoring, where sometimes the body creates a boundary that has been, so it's a little bit more on the emotional and energetic side, but it doesn't make it any less real. So other symptoms of stagnation could look like what we talked about before, like if the period blood is very dark, if there's a lot of clotting and pain, then that tells us that blood flow is not really optimal. So practices that bring blood circulation, bring blood flow to the womb and to the pelvis are going to be really helpful. Addressing any constipation, because there tends to be a correlation there as well. And then, definitely unwinding some of that tension that could be causing a lot of that overgrowth of tissue in the pelvic space is really helpful. And healing, sometimes there's a connection. There's a woman that I've worked with before, and for her, there was a forgotten, she didn't have a conscious memory until later in life, but sometimes domestic abuse, sexual abuse, sometimes will manifest as endometriosis for some women. So there's a trauma piece as well as like reducing inflammation, bringing more blood flow, addressing like any constipation, and then there could be an emotional piece that needs addressing too. Would you recommend contraceptives for period pain? No. Because, contraception is for preventing pregnancy. It's not for pain. But sometimes birth control is recommended to just stop the period, because sometimes, especially if a medical provider doesn't understand why someone, especially heavy bleeding tends to be a case where doctors will like, well, just stop the period. Like, let's just stop the period altogether and see if that helps. So no, I wouldn't ever recommend contraceptives for period pain, because contraceptives are to stop ovulation and to prevent pregnancy. Pain needs to be addressed. Why is there pain? Is there a growth that's causing pain? Is there dietary issues? Is it a lack of movement? Is it a very stagnant life? Is it a highly stressful life? Is there an emotional root? So understanding the period pain, but I would never recommend contraceptives for it. Do you work with women to shrink fibroids naturally? Yes. Fibroids in Eastern medicine are a combination of stagnation. So, there's needing to bring more circulation so that the uterus is cleansing like completely every month. It's also connected to in Eastern medicine, it would be considered dampness, having a lot of mucus in the body. And so over time, a lot of mucus can congeal and form fibroids. So fibroids respond really well to dietary changes as well as practices like castor oil packs and steaming and massage. Any other questions? Oh, I said I was going to put the links in the chat, so I'll do that while any other questions come in. I'll put the womb health checklist first. Okay, I'll put this here. Okay. And then the books. Usually we have so many more. Once you start talking about periods, it's like a never-ending stream of questions. So maybe you all are being modest today. This is for the book, and the coupon is buy $2. Oops, $2. Yeah. And are there medical ways to control or modulate hormones? I've heard of patches that have helped. So, in the realm of like the medical model, they can really give you synthetic hormones usually, right? So if something is low, they tend to be able to give you other synthetic hormones. But what do you mean by modulate? Like to have regular healthy periods? I don't think it's within the realm of pharmaceuticals to do that. It really comes to the lifestyle. So you can expand on that. What do you mean by control or modulate hormones? Because our hormones are, they are supposed to fluctuate. They're never intended to be like the same all the time until like either.
Sorry, I just muted you on accident. I'm gonna give people the option to unmute
Unmute.
if you would like.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
That's fine. So yeah, so when it comes to controlling, the hormones are a symphony, and so when ovulation happens well, then we can make progesterone, and then when progesterone, that takes us to the luteal phase. Like all of the phases of the menstrual cycle impact each other. So the goal is not like to have stable hormones. We actually need to support our body so it can go through these cascading, because there are certain times of the month where you're supposed to have high estrogen, and sometimes you're supposed to have high progesterone. And synthetic birth control can really, sometimes it can supplement what's low, a synthetic version of it, but over time your body will become less adept and capable of making your own natural hormones. So that's why it's not a solution for hormonal management. Regardless of whatever you're encountering, the foundation of hormonal health is universal for every human being, especially for women. Stable blood sugar, manage stress, elimination, rest, there's certain things that we really can't bypass when it comes to hormones, and we can't really outsource. Okay. All right. And I'll let you answer the question about the recording.
Yes, I responded to her. Yeah, I'll,
Okay.
yes. Well, if there's no other questions, thank you, Chantal. This was so extremely insightful. I picked up so many gems, and I know that my team members did too. We were talking about all the key points. So thank you so much. And yeah, if there's anything else you want to say, otherwise we can wrap up. And yeah,
What closing remarks. I'm glad that you all are here and that you care enough to give attention to this, because some women are just so done. They're just over it. They're like, I want my uterus out my body. I want my periods over, and it's sad because you really want women to witness like just the real beauty of our design while we can. So yeah, it's I'm glad that you're here and that you care and that you'll share this information with women in your life. So yeah, alhamdulillah, I'm glad you found benefit in it. And perimenopause is, they call it a second puberty. So and most of the women that I support in perimenopause have teen daughters, and so it's or pubescent daughters. So yeah, there's definitely those are two times of that require some care and some support, but all very doable. Very, very peaceful periods can be our reality. So my prayer for all of you is that your wombs are blessed and that your periods are peaceful. And if there's any way that I can be of support, please reach out.
inshallah. Thank you so much, Chantal.
Not a problem. Assalamu alaikum and take care.
Yeah.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته. جزاك الله خير. I have a quick question. She has a book, right? The sister has a book.
Yes, she does, and she
Okay,
put it
she
in
put it in the.
yes.
Okay, there we go. Peaceful
Yes.
periods. Okay, thank you.
Of course, no problem. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye. Okay, team members who are left, thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Cami, for helping moderate. I'm gonna close off the Zoom now, unless there's anything else. No? Sounds
No,
good.
I think it's fine.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, bye, Cami.
Ciao.